Shabbat Shalom. Somehow, we're coming up on a year since Rabbi Alex and I started our new life here in Cleveland with this incredible community, with all of you. And there's an interesting bookend to this past year. During my interview weekend, I spoke about Jethro, Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, a Midianite who teaches an overextended Moses how to delegate, how to step back and allow others to exercise leadership with us. Today, as we inch closer to my official installation, Yitro, Jethro, not heard from for a long time, just so happens to make a reappearance. In Bahalotcha, Moses invites his father-in-law to stay forever. Who of us can say that we've ever invited our in-laws to stay forever? But Moses wants him to cast his lot with the Jewish people, to be their eyes in the desert, to not leave their side. Jethro, Yitro, the man who teaches Moses how to take a step back, now teaches Moses one final lesson in delegation. In some ways, it's a lesson in the ultimate delegation, in that Yitro removes himself entirely. He teaches Moses that the best leaders are the ones who, in the end, make themselves unnecessary, the ones who leave behind such a lasting legacy and such solid systems in place that the community is set up for success even in the leader's inevitable absence, so that the success of the whole doesn't depend on any single individual to sustain it. Yitro declines Moses' offer to stay with the Israelites, to continue to bask in the glory of God even, as we read, Vayomer elav lo elech, ki im el artzi ve'el moladati elech. I will not go, he replied to him, but to my land and to my birthplace I will go. If Lin-Manuel Miranda made a Broadway mega-hit hip-hop musical of the Torah, Yitro in this moment is almost like George Washington telling Moses' Alexander Hamilton that he will not be seeking a third term in office. Instead, Yitro wants to teach them how to say goodbye. The best leaders know when to stay and when to go home. The commentators try to understand Yitro's decision to leave. Sforno, the 15th and 16th century Italian commentator, says that Yitro felt he was too old to venture with the Israelites to a new land, to adjust to new foods, to a new climate. Ostensibly, Yitro has reached the point where he wants to sit under his own vine and fig tree with no one to make him afraid, which is such a good line, Miranda must have gotten it from Torah. But the Or HaChaim, the 18th century Moroccan commentator, says that Yitro doesn't have retirement in mind. He argues that Yitro knew it was time for Moses' light to shine and that Yitro's light was needed elsewhere, back home. The Or HaChaim makes reference to a famous midrash where the moon complains to God about the sun. Is it possible for two kings to share one crown? What good is the light of the moon in broad daylight? In other words, you're the sun. You don't need me next to you anymore. Leaving, though difficult, is Yitro's highest compliment to Moses. Moses, whose face literally radiates divine glory after Sinai, is ready to shine on his own. And Yitro wants to bring some of that light back home to Midian, where he's needed more. The best leaders know when to stay and when to go home, when to shine their light and when to bring out the light in others. And it's a recurrent theme throughout our tradition as our ancestors were tasked with making this difficult choice. God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladatecha u'mibeit avicha. Go for yourself from your land and from your birthplace and from your father's house. Notice all the parallel language with our verse from this week. Lech and elech, meaning go and I will go. Artzecha and artzi, meaning land. Moladatecha and moladati, meaning birthplace. Abraham feels God calling him to leave home. Yitro feels God calling him back home. But it's not always easy to recognize or heed that call. When God sets out to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, God tells Lot and his family not to look back. Lot's wife, who isn't ready to leave home, looks back and is reduced to a pillar of salt. Leaving isn't always easy, and fear of the unknown can be paralyzing. We see that multiple times in this week's Parsha alone, as the Israelites complain that they had it better in Egypt. They want meat, not manna. They miss the cucumbers and the leeks and the fish of Egypt over a mere promise of milk and honey in an untasted, promised land. We often cling to the familiar, even when it's destructive, rather than face our fear of the unknown. But the truly great conquer that fear. When Eliezer, Abraham's servant, asks Rebekah to leave her land, her birthplace, and her father's house to marry Isaac, his master's son, Rebekah responds with, Elech, I will go. And just a couple of weeks ago on Shavuot, we read the book of Ruth, which gives us, in a way, an echo of Moses and Jethro in Ruth and Naomi, two parent and child-in-laws. Like Moses, Ruth clings to hers. Like Jethro, Naomi makes the case for returning home. Both Ruth and Yitro know where their destinies lie, and they make the difficult choice to leave or to stay. This week, Rabbi Alex lost her grandpa, her Opa, Cecil Joel. He was so deeply loved and will be so deeply missed. If we could, we would have invited him to stay forever, to not leave our side. On Thursday morning, he made the most difficult decision to go back home, to return to God, to bravely venture off into the ultimate unknown. Cecil was a consummate leader and businessman. He built an incredibly successful shipping container business, and he was a voracious learner of Torah and all things Jewish. Especially in his prime, he was a harmonica-playing life of the party, animated by a love of life and an even deeper love of family. Moses wants Yitro to stay, just like we all wanted Cecil to stay. But I like to think that in his final moments on earth, he took a good look at his family, and he saw how brightly they all shine. And he knew that just like the successful business he created, his family was going to continue to thrive and succeed even in his inevitable absence. Because like the moon, we reflect his radiance, and his light is needed now elsewhere, back home. I want to end with one last thought from the Or HaChaim, who picks up on one peculiarity from our verse. Lo elech ki'im el artzi ve'el moladati elech. Elech, I will go. That word appears twice. Nothing in Torah is redundant, so the commentator wants to know why Yitro says elech twice. He explains that the first one is Yitro's refusal to join the Israelites, but the second one is a subtle hint that Yitro will go with the Israelites in a different way, which is exactly what happens. Much later, we read in the book of Judges, quote, the descendants of the father-in-law of Moses went up with the Judahites from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, and they went and settled among the people in the Negev of Arad. In other words, it worked. Yitro brings his light back home to Midian, and it's so successful. He brings his generations, his descendants, to join the Israelite people, not as one man, but as a whole tribe. With one elech, Yitro leaves. But with the other elech, with the other I will go, he stays with us forever. Moses implements Yitro's second lesson as gracefully as the first. We read this week that God takes some of Moses' spirit and distributes it among 70 elders. Joshua gets jealous on Moses' behalf that others are prophesying like him, until Moses tells him, would that all of God's people were prophets. I don't want to hog that light. It's better shared, and it doesn't diminish me Just like the candles that Aaron, the high priest, lights in the beginning, a flame isn't diminished as it's shared. Moses knows when it's time to pass on his leadership and trust the divine systems and structures that have been put in place. Where he struggles to say goodbye is death. When God denies Moses entry into the promised land, Moses pleads and pleads until God has to tell him not to plead anymore. Moses, who knows that the people will go astray in the land once he's gone, doesn't want to die. He doesn't have the same confidence that Cecil had, that everyone is going to be okay even when he leaves. And he's right. We do go astray. But just like Moses' spirit is literally distributed among the elders, one elech means leaving, but the other elech means staying forever. So long as we cling to the laws of Moses, Moses remains with us forever. And how brightly the moon, the Israelites, will shine can only be ascertained once the sun sets. Only then can a new generation truly reflect the radiance of those who came before. We may all be confronting challenges in our own lives where we're contemplating where we need to leave and where we need to stay. And it's so specific to our own unique situations. But one of the lessons we get this week is that sometimes we need to leave and sometimes we need to stay, but both are holy acts. Yitro leaves, but his descendants join our people. Moses leaves, but his Torah endures forever. Our loved ones leave us too, but they stay with us forever. As we approach Installation Weekend, Rabbi Alex and I can share how easy our decision is to stay and look forward to the years ahead with this amazing community. More years to reflect your light, to learn, and to grow from your leadership, and to hopefully share ours. Because one of us left his homeland, and the other returned to hers. And now our little descendant has joined the fold. Sometimes we leave and sometimes we stay. Sometimes we share our light and sometimes we reflect the light of those who came before us. But ultimately what we do is Bahalotcha. We light the menorah, we cause the candles to burn brightly, and we strive always to be a light unto the nations. Shabbat Shalom.